morning, I'm Claire Murphy. This is the Solo Bureau. Many of you reached out to me yesterday to ask where you could post your fairy light pictures for the Winter Glimmers initiative that Carmen told us about yesterday. So I've popped the link to Carmen's Instagram in the show notes. I've put it in yesterday's as well, just in case, where you can share your fairy light pics. Just make sure you tag it with hashtag Winter Glimmers when you post it too. On the way later, I spoke to Indigenous Times reporter Joey Guenzler to get a better understanding of why a group of First Nations people and their allies are fighting hard to stop the construction of Brisbane's 2032 Olympic Stadium. But first up, here's what's going on in your world today. It's Thursday, June 4. An Australian man has been handed a restraining order for stalking after writing a card to Norwegian Princess Ingrid Alexander, who's studying at the University of Sydney. The 63-year-old wrote to the princess asking for her friendship and suggesting some events that might interest her after he met her at a previous one, telling the court that he was in no way threatening and that he considered Ingrid to be a nice person and didn't want to upset her. He's also been banned from entering the University of Sydney for 2 years. The man was then arrested just moments after leaving the courtroom after an altercation with a photographer. Meanwhile, the princess has returned to Norway after her mother fell ill with a serious lung condition. Queensland's Child Safety Minister has made a policy decision that no children under the age of 5 are to remain in residential care. The decision comes after a landmark inquiry into the state's child protection system that found the number of children and young people in residential care more than tripled in the last decade, and that Queensland had almost as many children in residential care as every other state and territory combined. The report also found that more than 2/3 of child sexual abuse victims were in care when the crimes happened. Premier David Crisafulli placed the blame on the previous Labor government. The South Australian government will hand down its first budget since their recent election landslide today, announcing a partial freeze on the recruitment of non-frontline public sector employees for the next 12 months. SA Premier Tom Koutsantonis called the move back office efficiency that won't impact jobs like teachers, police, doctors and nurses as they attempt to rein in the state's growing debt. While the move is set to save SA $120 million, experts say that's a drop in the ocean compared to what the debt bill actually is. Based on the mid-year budget, the debt's interest alone was costing the state more than $5 million a day or $1.9 billion a year. The United Nations has released a report showing the potential impact of AI data centres, showing that by the end of the decade, they could consume enough water to meet the drinking needs of every person on the planet for a year. The UN University Institute for Water, Environment and Health report also showed that if data centres were considered a country, they would produce as many emissions as the entire United Kingdom, rank 11th in the world for electricity consumption, and cover a landmass the equivalent of Northern Ireland by 2030. It also predicts they would generate 2.5 tonnes of e-waste. Tech companies are pushing to build more of the centres here in Australia, while the Senate has recently launched an inquiry into their regulation and spread. Lead investigator behind the report, Kavi Madane, said they hope to make these hidden environmental costs visible before they become unmanageable. Australian tech experts largely welcomed the report, but some said that AI tools were not the biggest contributor to climate change or single-handedly responsible for computing's carbon footprint. 2 AFL teams have broken with tradition and come together before the big game to honour the late Neil Daniher. Usually before the big freeze game, Daniher, who suffered from motor neurone disease and used his position to raise awareness and funds for research, would meet with the teams separately. But after his passing last week, his wife Jan and daughter Beck spoke to the teams together at the MCG ahead of Monday's big game. Beck said that this was usually her dad's moment and something he valued highly, explaining her last conversation with him was about this moment, a moment he was very much looking forward to, and that he was already preparing his speech. Melbourne's Jake Lever and Collingwood's Isaac Quaynor spoke in a joint press conference after the game, sharing their love for Daniher and his family and their continued push to help find a cure for MND.
Yeah, we just love Neil so much, and the game is just a small part of it, but I'm so glad that we get to play him.
Yeah, firstly I want to touch on just the impressive nature of Beck and Jan speaking in front of the whole group just before. Such a powerful moment. I think they spoke from the heart, and obviously going through such a tough time. So yeah, to be part of such an incredible week is something really special. Definitely at Collingwood we get to play in a lot of big games, but this is probably right at the top of the cake.
Okay, Headlines fans, that's all for today. If this is where you're signing off, have a great day and we'll catch you here again tomorrow. For those of you who have the time to stick around next, we find out why the location of the new Brisbane Olympic Stadium is causing heartache for the city's First Nations people. Brisbane, in case you've never been, is a city wrapped around a big brown snaking river. There are lines drawn depending on which side of that river you reside on, the North Crew or the South. It's often a sign of almost gang-like pride. But that same separation has ancient history. Meanjin is the traditional lands of two main Aboriginal nations, the Turrbal people, whose land runs from the centre of Meanjin City, stretching north to the Pine River and Bribie Island, and the Yagara people, whose lands cover the southern side of the river, the Brisbane River Valley and down to Ipswich and the Toowoomba Ranges. On the outskirts of the city is an area most of us would know as Victoria Park, but it has many names to those who belong to the land. Barrambin, Windy Place, Yorks Hollow or Wallen. In pre-colonial times, this space was the home of communities who would host gatherings and ceremonies. There would be intertribal diplomatic talks there. In 1846 and 1849, the site was burned to the ground by police and soldiers. But it continued to be used by Aboriginal groups for many years after that, and there are actually elders still alive today who once lived there. It's one of the most significant Indigenous sites in Brisbane. But it's also the proposed site of another thing Australians hold very sacred, an Olympic Games stadium. After a protest on the weekend, the space was closed to the public Sunday night as the Queensland government began its plan to build a stadium ready for the 2032 Olympic Games. It was announced as a location for the venue back in March 2025 by Premier David Crisafulli. 3 months later, the state government then passed legislation to exempt Olympic venues from having to go through the usual major planning and environmental laws, and that meant that they could bypass the park's heritage listing. By August 2025, a First Nations group had launched a legal bid to stop the development, and on April 5 this year, after failing to halt construction, father and son duo Uncle Derek Oromsandi and Derek, known as DJ Oromsandi Jr., a proud Yagara, Yungambar, Gangaloo and Wanyi man, established the Guri Camp Embassy, lighting a sacred fire to show that this space always was and always will be Aboriginal land where sovereignty was never ceded. Then, in the middle of the night, police moved in and forced the camp supporters to relocate, the Premier saying they can't stay as the heavy machinery moves in.
We can't have a construction site where there's going to be excavators and bulldozers and people protesting in the middle of it.
Joey Guenzler has been to the camp and has been reporting on the story for the National Indigenous Times. Joey, could you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, my name's Joey Guenzler. I'm a Gomeroi man and I grew up on the west side of Brisbane, also known as Magunjan.
Joey, welcome to the Solo Bureau. You actually spoke to DJ this week in the camp about police entering on Monday morning. What did he tell you about that experience?
Yeah, so about the police entering, there's been multiple occasions now where they've been camped up at the Guri Camp Embassy. And police have come in at the dead of night, particularly when there aren't many people around. I definitely think that's their strategy. So just that looming threat of the police presence sort of coming in, not being able to anticipate that, has definitely kept them on edge. This is something that, a lot of the mob have been through many a times, that I've witnessed firsthand and secondhand. And the idea of constantly being removed is something that they anticipated, hence why they've made an effort to have fires continuing at different locations, and we can get into that a bit later as well. But yeah, that has been just a critical thing, is basically to keep that fire going despite all of the police presence. So that's been, I guess, their main focus. And yeah, it definitely can take a toll mentally. But I mean, we're dealing with some really staunch and strong people here. So, all the power to them.
I understand DJ's dad was also arrested on Monday morning. Is he okay?
Yeah, the last update I got from DJ, he did confirm that Uncle Derek is okay. He's doing well. There's some other things happening in the background that I won't share. But overall, he is okay, despite what you see on the footage and things like that. And DJ did share with us that basically all his father was doing was, protecting and speaking in language and telling the police basically that they had no right to be doing what they were doing, particularly because there was, at that time on Friday especially, that there was ongoing court proceedings still. So, as far as the mob are concerned, nothing, especially on Friday, nothing like that should have happened.
The relationship between police and First Nations people is historically not good. What does it take for someone like DJ and Uncle Derek to actively go out and protest knowing that it will eventually bring them into contact with officers?
Look, I think, you said it already, the relationship with, the colonial justice system is not good, and it never has been. Indigenous people welcomed them onto their land all those years ago, and, they definitely took advantage. And I think to this day, just the idea that our ancestors have continually fought through thick and thin, no matter what the situation's been, we've been on the back foot, and it's kind of put us in this position where you don't really have a choice. So you either kind of stand up or you sit down. And most of us choose to stand up. And the ones that possibly may choose to sit down is only as a result of a lot of the trauma that it's continually brought over the last couple of years. And that's why we talk about intergenerational trauma.
You mentioned the sacred fire before. Can you just explain to us the role of the sacred fire and what that means to have that on the side of this potential construction?
Yeah, for sure. So DJ is definitely better at describing the fire, but basically what that fire represents is a continued cultural practice, which is something protected. The site of Burrumbin itself was protected as well, and the Deputy Premier got rid of that really fast in anticipation to build this stadium. And now basically the one way that we were, technically by their law able to protect the site is to have a continued cultural practice occurring on that site. And that's something that can't be disturbed, because the police also made an effort to not touch any of the tents with an Aboriginal flag. They didn't touch any of those tents. They removed everything else, but they didn't touch the tents. So they are aware of what they should and shouldn't be messing with. And the fire is just as important. And that fire has been continuing now for 73 days as of the time of us speaking. So yeah, that fire represents just literally an ongoing cultural ceremony that has not stopped for 73 days. And by their law, that can't actually be tampered with.
The pushback on this construction, as you mentioned before, is still before the courts. But this group of people are going up against the might of the Olympics, which, as we know, Australia is very proud of its Olympic history, both hosting of games and competing in them, and also the sheer amount of money that's already been invested in this project and the money it would take to then choose a new location away from Burrumbin. Does it feel like that's an extra layer of complexity to this fight, that this is just not any old construction, this is Olympic construction?
Yeah, it kind of does. And the ironic thing about it is that the Olympic Committee love talking about how First Nation stories are at the centre of what they do, especially in the last couple of years. And for this, this is a big deal. And yeah, for this to happen is definitely, it's a bit of a kick in the gut. It definitely adds a lot of weight to this situation, and just the nature of Brisbane's tourism and everything like that. And just because Brisbane has been booming since COVID, and it's just this bizarre idea of Brisbane becoming the most perfect city in the world, which it's already up there in the top 10 or whatever it is. It's just big, flashy stuff. Burrumbin, this site, it just doesn't need to be messed with. We have that many stadiums. We've got the Gabba that needs to be fixed. We've got Cusack Stadium, which could be expanded. We have all the area out by Chandler with the swimming pools, which could be built on. There's so many other spaces that this could be done. And for some reason, they chose the middle of the city, so little of what's left. Imagine if you put that up in New York, in the park there in New York. It just wouldn't make any sense.
What is the emotion like in camp due to that then? When you were there talking to people, does it feel like the fight has just begun, or with the work actually starting this week, does it leave people feeling like they can't win against something like this?
Yeah, well, look, I was there yesterday morning, and there was definitely a somber feeling, only because this time the camp is finally relegated to the outside of the fence. So they've got that boundary all the way up around the sides. And, I sat with DJ for quite some time before I even had a yarn with him, because, it's more about connecting, whereas a lot of the other news crews came through and DJ wouldn't interview them, so they just left because they're not willing to sit there and have a yarn. And basically DJ and I and my brother boy Say True God, he's a hip hop artist, we all went and collected firewood for the camp, because we need to keep that fire going regardless, because it's one of our strongest cases, apart from all of the other stuff, which I'm sure you'll ask me about, like to do with the actual site. The important thing is that we keep that fire going, because it's like our NAIDOC theme last year, which was keep the fire burning, black, loud and proud.
When you add that layer of past trauma to this, because as I've outlined just before speaking to you, this site has been traumatised in the past. We saw police, soldiers come in, burn it to the ground, people died. When you add that layer of past trauma to this, of people being forcibly removed from any land, but from this land in particular right now, what does that do to people who are living through that and still holding that past trauma in their hearts?
I think it can keep you driven and moving forwards. But yeah, it can also knock you back a couple pegs and you feel demotivated. What that leads to is what we see in Closing the Gap. All these different targets that are failing constantly is because, it's a direct result of everything that our past generations have been through. But now it's also the continued support, or their lack of support, of helping Indigenous people heal. So, this is just like another step, and it's a slap in the face.
Joey, just finally, the Queensland government has promised to leave 2/3 of the park as green space and revitalise the space in the wake of this build. What are the thoughts in the camp around that promise? Does it go anywhere near making this okay?
Yeah, 2/3. What that is, it's pretty damn generous of them to say that, because you think about how big an Olympic Stadium needs to be, not to mention housing the athletes nearby and parking. Like, Victoria Park was big, but it's not anymore, especially after all the development in the last sort of 15, 20 years. It's already been taken down by a massive chunk. If you look at the site and just the nature of its terraforming, like, you have to flatten so much dirt and land. There's 2/3 is such a generous stat. I just personally, none of us believe it. They might, implement new paths with new greenery, but so many of those ancient trees that have been there for so long are going to be torn down, because they're going to be right in the middle of the site. So it's unrealistic.
Joey, thank you so much for giving us some insight on this today. We really appreciate you giving us some of your time. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
For more on this story, the link to Joey's article is in the show notes today. I also sent a request for comment from David Crisafulli's office. I'll let you know when he responds. Thanks for hanging out with me again today, friends. I'll be back tomorrow. Hope you are warm and safe wherever you are today. You know what I'm going to say now, right? Rate and review the show in your podcast app when you have a tick. Thank you.